Okay, and okay, so we see we have few participants joining us already, 26 it looks like, and I know we have more signed up, so maybe a few more will be joining us as we get started here, but it is 3:30, so we wanted to start on time. So welcome and thank you for taking time out of your day to participate in this live webinar. My name is Elizabeth or Betsy Bertline. I teach at Kirkwood Community College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And this is my second year serving as the chair of the community colleges and adult ed. Oh, it looks like they cannot hear me. Can you guys hear me now? I see some chat participants that say cannot hear. I can hear you. Okay, I'm seeing more people saying now they can hear. So, so if you cannot hear, it may be a problem with the volume on your computer, but it looks like most people can hear. Thank you for those who answered. I will continue. So, so anyway, this is my second year serving as the chair of the Community College and Adult Education Interest Section for the Mid-TESOL organization. And one of the goals we set at our interest section meeting last fall was to organize a webinar for people who are involved in teaching English to adult students and community college students. So we hope this will help provide some professional development for anyone, but especially those who may not traditionally have access to our annual conference sessions due to economic or other barriers. So today, I am introducing Katie Rosenberger and Ann Duggar. They both work with developing curriculum and training volunteer tutors for English language learners at the nonprofit Catherine McCauley Center in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. They'll be giving this webinar version of a presentation that they gave at our annual conference last fall on adopting a strengths-based approach to teaching adults with emergent literacy skills. To briefly introduce the meaning of this strengths-based concept, I turn to a quote from teacher researcher Patsy Vinogradova, who you will find cited in Katie and Ann's presentation. Vinogradov says, there is a tendency for teachers and researchers to define emergent readers in terms of what they lack: formal schooling, L1 literacy, print awareness, etc. This is a very deficit way of approaching instruction. While these learners may not have the same approach to learning as those socialized in modern literate societies, they are, of course, no less capable or intelligent, and in fact, they may have many skills that literate students do not. So to prepare for this webinar, I visited Ann and Katie at the Catherine McCauley Center. And from my visit, I was able to witness how they and all of the staff here embody this strengths-based approach for anyone who walks through the door in search of an education or the other resources that they offer here. English lessons at Catherine McCauley Center are free and open to anyone who wants to learn. Most of the students who come to Catherine McCauley Center for English language lessons have come to the US as adult immigrants and refugees. Some of these students have limited or interrupted formal education in their home countries, which means that they may not have reading and writing ability in any language when they begin their English lessons at Catherine McCauley. As I visited here, I witnessed Katie and Ann interact with several students as we were walking through the building, and I could see how they know the students well and have a positive rapport with them. Students come to Catherine McCauley for education, but they receive something even greater: participation in a community that values their presence. And I see that really as illustrating the strengths-based approach. In the current political climate that surrounds us and our students with negative rhetoric about immigrants and refugees, this place is truly a refuge of positivity. Today, Katie and Ann will explain more about what it means to enact a strengths-based approach to teaching English to adults with emergent literacy skills. And they will guide us through a simulation activity to help us empathize with what these students experience when faced with a basic literacy task. There will be opportunities for audience members to verbally participate and ask questions using the hand-raising function on the Zoom webinar. So, and also the chat box. I will be monitoring the chat box and the Q&A, so feel free to use any of those features as Katie and Anne present. I will be on the side monitoring the questions and comments, and I will let them know when questions arise. So please do not hesitate to participate. And I will now give the floor to Katie and Anne so they may begin their presentation. All right. Go ahead and share the PowerPoint.
Close. Are we in? Oh, hello. Okay. Great.
Okay, thank you, Betsy. That was a lovely introduction. So as she has told us already, we're moving towards a strengths-based approach to teaching adults with emerging literacy today. So I guess we can give a little more background about ourselves.
And yes, again, thank you to Betsy for being here. I just said, thank goodness we're here. I am Ann Duggar. I am the Education Program Manager here at the Catherine McCauley Center. I have a BA in English. As you can see on your screen, I'm just reading it now. I have a master's in education with a teacher leadership emphasis. And I was just telling Betsy, who did not know my history, that I taught medical ethics and terminology and anatomy and physiology in Barbados for a few years, and have had over 20 years of experience in management as well. So that's me.
Yeah, and I am the Learning and Curriculum Specialist here at the Catherine McCauley Center. I actually set out originally to be a music teacher, so I have a degree in music, but through a fellowship at the Writing Center at the University of Iowa, I discovered a love for helping people with writing and especially with learning English. So I went on then to get my TESOL certificate, and since my school days have taught in a variety of contexts, including the community-based programming that we do here at the Catherine McCauley Center. So a little bit about us at CMC. Yeah. I think Anne would love to share.
And excuse me if I'm all over the place. I have a camera here showing me. So if my eyes are straying, I'm just really excited about the screen. So who we are, the Catherine McCauley Center. Last year in our adult basic education program, we had over 460 students who came and studied with us at least 4 hours. Typically in a week we have about 250 students, and they are taught by about that same number of volunteer tutors. Overall in the year we had 439 volunteer tutors come and help us with our mission, and with they learned from our students and our students learned from them. Our students represented 52 countries last year, so I always want to point out, in the middle of Iowa, in the middle of the United States, we have a city that has definitely 52 countries represented, so it's always pretty impressive when I think about that, and exciting as well. 90 of our students last year were what we would call emerging readers, people who came in and either had interrupted education or no education as they've gone through their journey in life. So we have a large population of people who are coming just to become literate in any language. We teach English as an additional language. And we say that because every student we have knows many languages. So we also do basic literacy, pre-high school equivalency as well, citizenship, computer skills. We have a couple of mathematics labs as well. And to also sort of offset all of this, we have refugee and immigrant services, which does resource navigation, case management, and employment services as well. And we have the other branch of our center is a transitional housing program that operates out of the upstairs of the building, and is a great addition as well. So that's who we are. There's a lot happening here all the time,
Yeah.
and many languages as well.
Yeah, many different parts of our community coming through the door every day. So as Betsy so beautifully introduced us, today we are going to be actually pretty participatory. So, you know, even if you're not raising your hand to ask us a question or typing answers in, we hope that you will take it upon yourself to really reflect and think deeply about your own kind of teaching context. So we're going to start with an activity that will hopefully help to build a bit of empathy for some of our emergent reader students, and then reflect upon that experience. We will talk specifically about the strengths-based approach and what it is and how you can actually carry it out in your classroom or in your organization, and hopefully wrap up by sharing a few resources. So I should say too that we won't necessarily be talking about teaching techniques today. This is more about a mindset towards these students. So if you are looking for specific techniques or maybe activities that you can use with these students, stay tuned to the resources section, because we will share where you will be able to find some of that information. So we have a few questions for you actually about your work with these learners. So I'm going to pull up a poll here, and we'd like to hear from you. So if you can go into the poll and share your answers to these questions. The first one being, to what degree do you work with adults with emergent literacy skills? And are you using a strengths-based approach already, or is that something that you would like to adopt? So we'll just give a few moments for people's answers to roll in. Here they come.
Like magic. I love this. Well, it's got the seconds, so we can time it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right.
We can see how many participants.
Yeah.
That's great.
39% have voted thus far.
So it looks like so far the majority of folks have a few emergent literacy students, and maybe some people who started that way. And a lot of people are unsure what it means to teach with a strengths-based approach. So that's great.
We're helping with that.
We'll talk about that. Great. Okay, thank you for your responses. I'd also like to ask you, share results so everyone can see. Great. So if you could take a moment and just type into the chat box. There are no right or wrong answers here, but this is just kind of to see where people are at already in their mindset. What are some common words and phrases that you use or that you hear other people use when speaking about emergent readers?
So someone has their hand up, it looks like. Let me just figure out how to call on them. How do I do that?
Oh, we might have to do that from in here, actually. Participants.
Let's see. Attendees. Sorry, we're trying to figure out how to call on someone with their hand up. Marwa, Janina, do we see that in our?
It looks like it's alphabetized by first name, maybe, so we know that because we do that here.
Okay, someone said that Marwa had her hand up. I'll try to allow you to talk and see if that works.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. So maybe she can.
Well, we can try that. Sorry, Marwa, I'm not sure. We got a message that your hand was raised and that you may have a comment or a question. Did you have something you wanted to share? You're now, we're able to hear you verbally. Maybe not.
So maybe Marwa, you could type your comment or question into the chat box and we can share that with the group.
Oh, we don't want to. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I think that the best solution here, we were hoping to maybe have some people share verbally, but it's looking like that's going to be difficult. So yeah, so we have a few people who did share in the chat box. Common words are literacy level, pre-literacy level, true beginners, tenacious, frustrated are a couple words that come to mind to describe emerging readers. My heart breaks for them, to be honest, someone wrote. Slow, take lots of time to work through a lesson, may get frustrated easily, usually have outside obligations that interfere with their class attendance. To the students, please try, and there is no problem with mistakes. And then someone wrote underestimated. That is, they are commonly seen as having a lower language level than they may really have. And someone else wrote, I'm so grateful for smartphones and the translation feature. So yeah, some great comments there.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So yeah, I heard the word frustrated a few times, either on the part of the students or on the teachers, and I have definitely seen that as well. But I'm glad to know that some of you are also picking up on the fact that oftentimes these students are underestimated. So on that note, we're going to jump right in to our activity. So, oh dear. We are, for this activity, kind of entering an alternate world where we still share a common spoken language of English. However, all of the text in our world has changed and we are no longer able to read it. So we're going to think a little bit about what it would take to get through daily life if this were the case for you, and maybe some strengths or skills that you would have to draw on in order to accomplish a task. So take a look at this. This is a piece of paper that has shown up at your house in the mail. So take a minute and think about what would you do. So you are able to speak with the people around you, but you do not have access to print literacy in order to handle this. It looks like it may be something important, but if anyone has an idea of what they would do, you can share your responses in the chat box.
My first thought was like, I might avoid it.
Avoidance, yes,
just,
perhaps.
Oh my goodness, it's too hard. Oh my goodness.
Yes, someone wrote, throw it away.
Throw it away, yeah.
Okay, someone says I would make a guess from the symbol that it's maybe a medical document.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Another person says I'd take it to school and ask my teacher.
Yeah.
Or bring it to a neighbor and ask them.
Yeah. Great.
To ask someone else.
Well, and that's a good point too. I mean, I'm sure many of you have had this where you have a student come up and hand you something like this, and it is a moment of like, I'm not sure I should know all of this about you, or you know, and thinking about confidentiality as well. But I think we've all had that where you're trying so hard to help somebody understand something like this, and also in a very strange sort of intimate spot with them while you're reading their mail. So
yeah. So what are some things that you notice in this document? Obviously we can't read what it says, but what information are you able to gather from it just by looking at what you can? Someone mentioned that they thought it was a medical bill. So what gave you that clue?
So someone said from the table, their guess was that it had to do with billing, and the symbol in the upper left, the Blue Cross, and let's see, name and address, they said, next to the blue circle. It looks, I mean, they're familiar with that. I wonder if it's an explanation of benefits, EOB. So if you're familiar with that kind of document already. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yep. So how would you handle this? A few people have mentioned, you know, throw it in the trash, take it to your teacher. A lot of different maybe strategies might come to mind here. I guess if you were going to seek help with this, how would you determine who you could ask for help and who might be a trustworthy person who you could go to with this?
Let's see, someone said, wait, how did we know it was from school? I may have missed something. I don't think this document wasn't coming from school. It's, yeah, we don't know where it came from. It arrived in the student's mail. So they said they could ask a trusted source, such as a church or a school, someone official, like a teacher, a government office. Yeah, so we're to answer the question that came in, we're totally clueless of where it came from. It just arrived in the mail.
Showed up.
We'd probably want to find another person that speaks my language in a community that might trust them. I might trust them more to translate so I could understand. I mean, that's a good point, but we don't necessarily have the ability to explain in the student's language what this is, even if we know what it is.
I think we've got a few students who would maybe make the connection with the symbol if they've seen that symbol in the community and say, oh, I can go here to get help with it, the same where I saw the symbol. I feel like we've got a few who would definitely make that connection and go directly to the source if needed. So
yeah, definitely.
Some people said they would put it into Google Translate, so that's a resource that's out there now that I mean, they do have the camera feature that you can even hold above a document.
Yeah, and then have it read to you what it says.
it's pretty
Great.
savvy.
Yeah, so that's, thank you all for sharing. It's just, yeah, to kind of put in your mind the different level of resourcefulness that students may need to exhibit in order to handle things that we might take for granted. I know if this, it is an explanation of benefits, so whoever guessed that was right. This, you know, if it showed up in the mail, I might also be inclined to avoid it and maybe shove it into my pile of papers to deal with later. And I am a person who has a very high level of literacy, so definitely. Another thing to point out here too is that some people were pointing out kind of like meta-textual things within this. So noticing the symbol, noticing the table and the way that things are formatted on the page, and the fact that a name and address is normally towards the top, either on the right or the left side with mail like this. And that may be something that your students have picked up on already. As Anne said, you know, if they have encountered that symbol before, they might know what that means. That also may be something with your students that you will have to address and not take for granted that they will understand that right out of the gate. So thinking kind of along these lines, in your current life, things that you are already doing, what activities might be still comfortable, be comfortable or easy for you if you didn't have access to print literacy? So first we're going to think about within your home, in your family life, or in your faith community, what might be some things that would be pretty much the same if you weren't literate in any language.
Someone says TV, video games, podcasts, Netflix. When I was in Spain and traveled by train alone from Spain to Germany, I found people that spoke English. Potlucks, listening to music, cooking, eating, cleaning, caring for children.
Yep.
So the things that are
exercising,
the same across the board, we all know those things.
Many churches now broadcast online video and audio.
Yeah, so these are, good places to start with students in finding some of that common ground and things that are already within their comfort zone. So now thinking about at work or school, what are some things that would still be comfortable for you and still easy, even if you were not using literacy skills? just from my own example, I spend a large part of my day just face-to-face with students and tutors here at the center and building relationships, and I think that would still be.
You were very good at that. I was thinking stapling would be easy.
Stapling.
I would be able to staple things. I know that for sure.
So someone having manual tasks, lunch,
Yep.
Lunch.
Um,
Ooh, good one.
looking at pictures, school sporting events, buying fresh food. I guess that's more of a home life thing, but conversations.
Yep, great. And now what about just kind of out and about in public spaces or getting around? What would be easy still?
Someone said you can learn by watching a coworker. That's still relating to work, but that's another way you could learn without print literacy.
Yeah, observing, and I think that's very true of many of our students. They're very good at observing situations and the people around them.
And someone said walking, and there's a question. They said pictures, but are pictures print literacy?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yes and no. I think it's definitely two-dimensional information about the three-dimensional world. So depending on the level of exposure that your student has had to pictures, they may or may not be able to interpret those yet.
Someone said the maps in Chicago, like for public transportation, are color-coded. Public spaces would be hard, shopping, prices, and money, but you could still look around.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely. So now this might lead into what might be challenging for you. So in any of these environments, what might be some things you would come up against?
Medical needs.
Medical needs.
Deciding which bus to take.
Mm-hmm.
Buses are always.
Buses are hard.
I'm always impressed when people can get around by bus.
Mm-hmm.
Brenda has her hand up. Let's see if I can call on her. Let's see.
So someone, while Betsy's doing that, I'll read off some of the responses. Finding a specific location was one. You could get lost, could be embarrassed by misinterpreting signs. Directions and rules are almost always written. I think that's very true. In our society, we're very dependent on text for information. So it can be harder to access that information as a result of that if you are not literate.
So I enabled Brenda to talk as you had your hand up. I don't know if, are you able to speak, Brenda? We're not hearing anything from your end. I think maybe the best thing to do, we'll just keep participation to the chat box because it seems that the hand raising feature is not working all that well. So if you have, you can type questions or comments, but I think we're gonna have to not do the hand raising, unfortunately, this time. So sorry about that.
The way it goes with technology. And I would also add, I see a few messages are coming up as private. So if you could just be sure you're sharing to all of the panelists in the chat box, that way we can all see what people are saying. So
someone wrote a longer comment here. I met a gal on the Spain-France border from Finland who spoke English, and she literally walked me through using public transportation. It was amazing and necessary. So relying on the kindness of a stranger, that's
definitely. Yeah, thank you.
And I want to say too, I think some of the symbols out there, I think what might be challenging is you might know some symbols, but some of our symbols in America don't make sense to many of our students. They are, or in the medical world, sometimes are downright scary, quite honestly. So trying to even read symbols becomes a challenge as well. So.
Definitely. So now this brings us to the strengths-based approach and what it actually is. Let me see if I can move my slide forward. Okay, so in a nutshell, the strengths-based approach just means that everyone and we mean everyone, has strengths, abilities, and skills that can be built upon. So we all have that starting point. And as educators, we can assist students with discovering their own strengths. So I definitely see the strengths in my students, and some of them are very confident already, and others of them maybe don't see that within themselves. And so part of my role as a teacher to them is to help them find those strengths and again, to build upon and complement what is already present. So this does not mean avoiding the truth or minimizing challenges. I think especially with people who are emerging or pre-literate, coming here to the United States, we have incredibly high demands for literacy in our society, and it is very, very challenging just to get through daily life here if you don't have access to all of the information that is in print in our society. So this is not to sweep any of that under the rug or to minimize the challenges of gaining literacy later in life, because that is definitely can be a monumental task, but just to really always come back to what is already there. What are students already doing for themselves? So I found this quote, which I think really perfectly kind of sums up what I'm trying to say here, which is that literacy level learners may be beginning learners, but they are not beginning thinkers. They have budgeted their time and resources, handled everyday survival needs for themselves and their families, and solved the myriad of problems which face any adult. We need to recognize their abilities as adults while we provide opportunities for them to acquire basic English skills. So this is really what that means. So kind of combining optimism and realism in an appropriate way here, hopefully. So common strengths of literacy learners is really, like I said, we're really trying to shift our thinking here with this approach. So again, not thinking about what our students lack and what they don't have, but really seeing this as a different approach to learning, because these are people who have been learning already throughout their lives. They've learned their own culture, they've learned a lot of different skills, they've learned how to handle those adult responsibilities to themselves and their families. And so it's about tapping into what is already there. So
we have one comment I wanted to share. One thing I know about them, they are incredibly humble and grateful to us who have the patience and compassion to help them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true, definitely. So this is something that I definitely see with my students are very well developed memory skills, because they have made it through their whole lives without taking notes. I know that for me personally, if I don't write something down, it never happened, or I will not be there, and that's just how it is. I have my phone on me at all times with my calendar so that I know where I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing. But our emerging literacy students are able to get around and do what they need to do without that reliance on writing things down, just relying on their memory skills. They also tend to have more of an acquisition approach to language versus more intellectual or analytical learning. So just maybe like absorbing the language and starting to use it rather than having to intellectualize everything and learn the rules of grammar, for instance, before they can go ahead and.
Yeah, I would say we have a student that we were just talking about before this webinar who he comes in, he does not speak English, he's learning. And he says hi. He said hi to us for many months, and is very expressive. And we always kind of know what he wants and what he's looking for. But he added "good morning" last week, and it was like, oh my gosh, but he, like, the idea of acquisition, and he was very, very clearly proud of the fact that he had added or acquired a new way to greet us.
Mhm.
So that absolutely makes sense, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen that as well, this acquisition versus learning.
Mhm.
We had a couple of comments. One student said, or one participant said, yes, I have a student in this boat and she learns fast and she refuses to be behind. She's like the MVP in the class. She writes things a million times until she has it cold. She does a ton of outside classwork to make it happen. She's a total rock star. And another comment, I had a student once who watched TV news and was well informed about current events because of what he heard and probably his interest in keeping up to date with world events. So
Yeah.
a
Definitely.
good example of where they don't necessarily need access to print literacy to be very well informed.
Mhm. Absolutely, yeah. We just had an intake, a new student arrived last week who told me she had never been to school before. And I asked her, well, how did you learn to speak English? Because you can already talk to me. And she was able to write a few things on her intake form. And she said that she had just learned by really observing and had watched TV and picked up some phrases, and her kids had shown her how to write her name. And so, you know, even without access to formal education, she was already well on her way to gaining those skills. Yeah, so we also, and this may not necessarily apply to English yet if someone is very much a beginner in English, but at the very least in their native language or often languages, these students may have very well developed oral skills because, again, they have not been reliant on writing in order to communicate. Everything has come through speech. So they have comparatively spent a lot of time with that and developing those skills.
And we're pretty lucky here in terms of on our staff. We probably have I think probably 6 to 8 different languages. So sometimes we're just cycling through people and languages to get to the right moment where we can say, okay, now we understand what you're saying. But certainly, well-developed oral skills in any language is up there.
Yeah, definitely. And the final one that I will mention explicitly is professional expertise and practical skills. So, you know, many of our students had a career or a trade before coming to the United States. I have quite a few students who were farmers, and so they have a tremendous amount of knowledge about agriculture, growing food, caring for animals, and they really bring that with them as a strength into the classroom. So I have a couple of students who are farmers, and my grandfather was a farmer, and here in Iowa, we like to talk about the weather a lot. So we kind of have used that to get things rolling every day. We'll take a little bit of time to comment on the weather. A lot of people have gardens, so we'll kind of share with each other what's growing, what's going on, maybe complain if it's too cold and we have a horrible winter like the last one. It's just a good place to, again, find common ground and a place to start.
And I think with the farming specifically for people who have grown up in Iowa, understanding that it's a strength of the state itself, and that it's kind of a community builder to have those conversations just about, you know, isn't it wonderful that you have ended up here in this state where we're so excited always about growing things. So it's kind of, I think it just helps our students really feel like they're part of their community as well. So.
Definitely. So if you can, again, kind of draw on this background knowledge that your students have that can make for some really successful lessons even. I've heard of a teacher, I think she might be from the Minnesota Literacy Council. Unfortunately, I don't remember who, but she had a group of women from Somalia who were all seamstresses, and had a lot of expertise and skills around that. So she created a lesson around that, and they were able to use their skills in order to practice some basic math skills and geometry, and put it into their own comfort zone, and meet them kind of where they already had a lot of expertise. So some of you are already working with these learners, at least a few of them. So I would also like to hear from you. Can you think of any other strengths of our emerging literacy students?
And one person just commented, she said, at our school we have resources, particularly in labs, that are willing to hire the students with specific talents. So maybe connecting students to some of those resources that recognize their strengths in a monetary way, I guess. That'd be nice.
Definitely.
Yeah, and feel free to comment any other strengths you can think of. Let's see, one I met yesterday is far more motivated than some of the literate students to pursue her goals. My student points, I guess, to indicate what they need or.
Definitely. So you can continue sharing those in the box as you think of them. We really would love to hear.
So the student who points, she explained, because he doesn't use words, so he's literally communicating with the pointing. Community responsibility, folks supporting each other, sharing rides, bringing meals, no one is left behind, good listening skills, motivated, it's effective. I think speaking is overwhelming. It's too much info. I don't know what else.
That makes me think a couple of things. Certainly, first of all, nonverbals. I mean, that is absolutely a strength, being able to communicate, not even verbally. But also, I think we can't underestimate many of the cultures that many of us are interacting with have maybe a different sense of community, and the comments there just about nobody left behind, the community really takes care of each other. We always need to keep that in mind, that sometimes it isn't just the one person, it's many people in the community that are being helped actually by just one person coming and learning. So another real strength that we see daily here at the center is how people interact with the community of students and tutors here. So.
Absolutely.
Someone said, it's amazing how much you can learn from a person based off nonverbal body language. My student who is this level erases the board for me, helps me arrange chairs, etc. He is so precious.
Great.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So we're going to share a little bit about kind of at the Catherine Macaulay Center specifically, how does this look for us? But I really encourage you to keep sharing in the comments about specific strengths or experiences that you've had with these students. So take it away, Anne. How this looks at CMC.
I got my new bifocals here. So for students, we really want to take into account their history, their experiences. We tell our tutors right off the bat at their tutor orientation, never forget that you are teaching an adult who has a whole adult life that they came with. I get kind of weepy about it when I think about just this idea of the courage it takes to come from many countries away and not know a language and perhaps not be literate in any language, and then to say, hey, I would like to become literate in a language I've never studied, is pretty fantastic. So we always want to be excited about that and say, hey, what a great strength that you have this courage to do it. We definitely try and for the most part, we ask every student what their goal is, what they want to learn about. I just was talking with someone else here at the center about, we've got a few older women on Wednesday night who come in for an hour a week to learn their letters and gain some English. And we want to ask, we've asked them, what is it you want? And one of the ladies wants to just be able to go to the store and touch her kids. So trying to kind of tailor that to their needs is something that we really want to take into account. And certainly asking ourselves what success means to us, but also what success means to the next person, because Katie's success is not my success. And our students, what they consider success is just sometimes nowhere near what we consider for ourselves success. So I think one of the cool things about being in a community-based program, and we're often sort of like, oh, we get to ask this, but we also get to kind of help students progress through that at their own pace, and we're very happy to be able to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, our volunteer tutors, which we have many, many of them, and from many walks of life, and they are pretty golden to us. We try and be very honest about what we expect of them in terms of the quality of education that they need to be giving to our students. We set pretty clear expectations, we hope, and if we don't, if there's any tutors on the webinar, let us know if we don't. On the same hand, that our students have a lot of courage to come here and ask for the help and ask for, to learn. We also need to take into account that our volunteer tutors are adult learners as well, and it took a lot of courage to, outstretch their hand and say, yes, I can help. So we always want to be excited and talk about the strengths that takes. And to have the openness for the new experiences, and make sure they know they are learners. This has been a really big thing for us in the last couple of years, is really to ask them to undergo some professional development, do some trainings with us, talk about ways to use the books. Not everybody is a teacher or retired teacher of our 400 volunteers, so we've tried to offer as many possibilities for them to learn as well. So
yeah, I remember having a conversation maybe a couple of years ago now, where it kind of dawned on us both at the same time that, oh, the students are not really our students. Actually, for us as the staff, the volunteers really are our students, and kind of making that mental shift to seeing them as learners too, I think is really, really important when you're working with volunteers.
Absolutely, absolutely. So with our staff, we definitely try, and I do this a lot. A lot of our team meetings have to do with what is your strength, and how can we best utilize that strength and maximize that. So we try and assign tasks and projects just within our team of 6 people, our staff of 6, that are really based on the strengths and interests of the staff itself. And identify those along with their own personal goals. So definitely with staff, we're strengths-based as well. This is we're going to go all the way up here.
It goes all the way.
The program itself, one of the great strengths, again, of the community-based program is we can really take the time. Our funding isn't for the most part tied to progression of students in a very quick way. So we can say, hey, what's your goal? How can we, what curriculum do we have that will help you with that goal? And if it takes you 2 years, great. If it takes you 6 months, great. But we'll just continue to be here as your goals change sometimes, and as successes kind of pile up as they usually do. We'll still continue to be here. So we've got quite a few students who have been with us for many, many, many years. Quite a few. We just had one come back. He's been gone for a year, and we had general screaming and excitement that he's back. So we have that happen as well, where people come and go. But it is definitely one of the things that we're not tied to funding in the same way that a lot of programs are in terms of progression of students. So we're excited about that as well.
Yeah, and I think especially for students who maybe have more going on or higher barriers, who are not necessarily at a point to make that commitment of coming and attending class regularly over a long period of time, I think that we are very well kind of situated to serve them. We have we have students who will come as they're able and then maybe drop out for a few months or a year at a time and then come back once things settle down. And yeah, we don't necessarily have a fixed schedule that we have to hold to. So that
I think it's also really important when you're thinking about your own programs and places where you, I almost said places of worship, places where you work. One of the cool things, and having Betsy here has been really great in terms of our community is how we're able to work with Kirkwood. We have so many students who also go to Kirkwood who are, you know, taking a look at what is each program really good at and what can we do to sort of work together to make sure all of the students are taken care of has been really, really helpful. And sometimes students leave and say, hey, I'm going to Kirkwood. I'll be back in when my classes are done, and you know, we do that. We're very happy as long as they're still learning, but we've got this really nice a couple of different options for students to take part in. So it's a strength of the community itself as well.
Yeah, and this is something too that you can, even in your own community, I would really encourage you to think on that higher level. So not just only within your kind of the walls of your organization or program, but like out there in the community, is there someone who you could partner with and build maybe a referral network or team up with them to try to make sure that all students are being served.
And volunteers too.
And volunteers, definitely. Yep, absolutely. So now
we're at 4:21.
4:21, perfect. So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to really try to hone in and make this really specific for you who are attending. So if you could think about someone specifically that you work with. This could be someone who is an emerging reader, or if you're not working with emerging readers, then really any learner would do. What are some strengths of a specific learner that you work with? Think about that person, name them in your mind, and think about how you could complement or build on the strengths that they already have. So we'll have maybe a few seconds of silence for people to think, but if you could type your answers, we'll share them as they roll in.
This is really fun to think about. It's just fun to think about students, really. Do you have somebody you're thinking of?
Yeah, so I work with a student who she is an emerging reader, and she has low vision as well. So it's been a really kind of challenging road for her because not only is she learning to read later in life, but she also doesn't really have clear vision to do so. But I think one of her real strengths is her like willingness to try. She doesn't have a fear of making mistakes and is very willing to take risks. And even if she like can't see a word very clearly, she'll throw something out there and see see if it sticks. And so that has been a real asset, I think, for her in her learning, and has also inspired some of the students around her too to come out of their shells a little bit and be more willing to to just take risks and see what happens.
And another person commented, one of my students have so much self-confidence, he doesn't mind speaking even when he makes mistakes. So really similar, although another commenter had kind of the opposite. They are humble enough to realize where they are, so they don't feel hurt if they sit out an activity and instead just observe. That was a powerful lesson for me to learn from them. Hey, it's okay if you don't participate in everything. It's okay to allow them to work at their own pace, even if it seems like they're being neglected. Mm-hmm. That reminds me a little bit of like the silent period. I remember learning second language acquisition, and so maybe some of them are just kind of taking everything in, and they don't need to necessarily be speaking all the time.
That's very true. Yeah, observation is really important.
Someone else wrote, the learner is incredibly resilient and has incredible motivation to reach his goals. Someone loves to cook and cooks delicious food. I could work on her writing recipes to share.
Oh, yeah,
That's a good
absolutely.
way to build on the strength.
Build on something she's interested in. Yeah.
I'm always trying to get that going here.
Yeah.
I just want more recipes.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah, so we, some of my students too have a really good sense of direction because again, they have not necessarily been reliant on street signs to find their way. So that's another thing we've done is like, they know exactly where everything is. So I've taken them outside and said like, okay, well, let's walk over to the street you're talking about and then we'll practice reading the sign and maybe go from there. But that, yeah, spatial awareness can be really strong too. Great.
Someone mentioned sense of humor. We just laugh a lot at ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And let's see. I have a student who's very motivated to learn and loves to participate and offer answers in class. Love to see and try and stretch yourself.
Great.
Yeah. So this is a really good exercise, I think, as you're preparing lesson plans even. Sometimes I like to just think about a specific student and almost plan the lesson around their strengths and kind of rotate around so that everyone gets a turn. But just making it a habit to really look for this instead of looking for those maybe frustrations or challenges, looking for the strengths that are there that you can complement.
And this makes me think, and it's maybe, maybe a little out there, but I think this also, when you're thinking in this way, just the level of mercy and compassion that comes into play where you start to really realize maybe, and I think every teacher I've ever met has this feeling of, really wanting to promote and get students excited about something that they're good at, or that that one is one of their strengths. And I think we've probably all seen this where something happens, you get excited, like, wow, you're really good at that. And just to see the level of kind of happiness and understanding and appreciation from your student is a big deal as well. So this goes on into a lot of other, bigger layers as you're teaching. So
I had one more comment. Many of my students work really hard and I try to assure them that the results will show up in time, not to worry if progress moves and fits and starts.
Yeah,
that's a big deal.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And that can be hard. I know when we're tied to semester schedules and student learning outcomes, that's where we see the Catherine McCauley Center is, uniquely situated. You don't have to follow those schedules.
Yeah. Along those lines, though, I wanted to mention something I had just heard. I was at the COABE conference down in New Orleans a couple weeks ago, and saw a video that was from the Minnesota Literacy Council of a teacher who was taking her students through a lesson that was aligned with the career and college readiness standards. And so she had to kind of accomplish pretty rigorous standards, I think, for instruction, and was specifically working with her students on citing evidence as one of those standards. And so they weren't necessarily at a point where they could read a text and cite evidence within the text for their opinions, but she used a picture to accomplish that. And so even though they weren't able to read a whole text yet, they were still, again, they're not beginning thinkers, they're beginning learners, but not beginning thinkers. So really being creative about how you're meeting them, and maybe how to draw out those thinking skills. So it was really, I wish I could have shown it here, but we don't have time. But the students all had really strong opinions about about the particular question, and all were able to cite strong evidence for that within the picture. So yeah, we're running low on time, so I'm going to just flash one last question for you, but we won't really have time to discuss this. So also, this applies to everyone in your organization, not just students, as we talked about. So take some time to think about a strengths of a volunteer tutor at your agency if you have them, and even about yourself and what are your own strengths as a teacher. and how can you then build on those for effective instruction? So I will leave you with an educator strength. I think we're always looking around. I know I spend a lot of my days just trolling the internet looking for information and resources. So if you have anything that you have found particularly helpful, I would love for you to share that within the comments. This would be maybe information and research that you've come across, any instructional materials that you've used in the classroom, or any training materials you've used for professional development with either staff or volunteer tutors. So I have kind of a Google Doc going with some of these that were shared when we gave this presentation at the Mid-TESOL conference. So if you follow that link, you can find a lot of resources that we were able to compile kind of as a community of educators at that conference. And hopefully I'll be able to add to it as a few more people share in the comments. So
I was also going to add, since sorry, I'll go on the camera so now that it's the talking head, I guess, or talking voice. Yeah, you can also find information on how to contact me on the Mid-TESOL website if you go to the interest sections and look at adult ed and community colleges, and there's my email address on there. And then also we have a Facebook page for adult ed and community colleges on Mid-TESOL that you can find a link to on that Mid-TESOL website interest section page as well. So those are some other resources that you could go on and share, since I don't know that we're going to have access to the comments after we wrap up in just a minute here. So yeah, so I encourage you to all go on, either email me resources and I can add them to that tiny URL that's down there, or just go on our Facebook page and share, and you can post directly once you're a member of that group. So that would be great as well.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for being with us today and for your input. We've had some really great comments from the participants here today. So
yeah, thank you to Katie and Ann too for being here. Completely volunteer on their part, so we really appreciate them taking the time to prepare this and deliver it, and I hope that you guys all appreciate it as well. So thank you again, and we'll shut things down here, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks.